The day my father died, my brother smiled. Not because he wasn't grieving. Not because he didn't love Dad. He smiled because, somewhere in his mind, he had already inherited a fortune. And when the lawyer finally opened my father's will, my brother's smile became even wider. The mansion. The investment properties. The family business. The retirement accounts. Everything appeared to be going to him. I sat silently across the conference table, watching him absorb every word. Then the lawyer reached the final page. He stopped. He looked at my brother. Then he looked at me. And quietly said, "There's one account your father never mentioned to either of you." My brother's smile disappeared. Because whatever was inside that account had nothing to do with the millions he thought he'd inherited. And what we discovered next would force me to question everything I believed about my father. My name is Emily Carter, and I'm 37 years old. For most of my life, I had been the quiet one in my family. My older brother, Daniel, was different. Daniel was confident, charming, ambitious, and according to my father, destined for greatness. Dad used to say, "Daniel knows how to make money." I never argued with him. I wasn't interested in competing with my brother. I had built a simple life for myself. I worked as an accountant for a small medical company. I rented a modest house. I paid my bills. And I stayed away from family arguments whenever possible. Daniel, however, lived differently. He drove expensive cars. He wore designer watches. He went on expensive vacations. And somehow, whenever things went wrong, Dad was there to rescue him. When Daniel's business failed, Dad invested money. When Daniel couldn't make his mortgage payment, Dad covered it. When Daniel needed money for another business idea, Dad gave him another chance. I watched all of this from a distance. Sometimes it hurt. But I told myself that parents simply have different relationships with different children. I never imagined that one day, that difference would become the center of our family's biggest secret. My father, Robert Carter, was 68 when he died. He had built a successful construction company from nothing. By the time I was born, the company was already worth millions. But Dad never acted like a rich man. He drove an old pickup truck. He repaired things himself. He hated wasting money. And he always told us the same thing. Money isn't what makes a person valuable. Ironically, those words became the most important sentence he ever said. Dad died suddenly one Tuesday morning. A heart attack. There was no warning. No long goodbye. No final conversation. One moment he was sitting at his kitchen table drinking coffee. The next, he was gone. I remember standing beside his hospital bed that morning, holding his hand. It was still warm. I kept waiting for him to open his eyes. He never did. Daniel arrived nearly an hour later. He hugged Mom. He cried. Then, when nobody was watching, he asked me something that made my stomach turn. "Did Dad ever tell you where the will is?" I stared at him. "Why?" He looked uncomfortable. "I just want to make sure everything is handled properly." I nodded. But something about his question stayed with me. The funeral was 3 days later. Hundreds of people came. Employees from Dad's company. Business partners. Neighbors. Old friends. Family members I hadn't seen in years. Everyone talked about what a generous man Dad had been. Daniel stood beside Mom the entire time. He looked devastated. But I noticed something strange. Every time someone mentioned the company, Daniel's eyes changed. Every time someone mentioned Dad's properties, he became more attentive. And when one of Dad's longtime business partners whispered, "Your father left behind quite an estate," Daniel quietly replied, "Yes. He did." Almost proudly. That night, after the funeral, our family gathered at Mom's house. Nobody ate much. Nobody laughed. Then Daniel finally spoke. "Mom, when is the lawyer reading Dad's will?" Mom looked at him. "Next Monday." Daniel nodded. "Good." I looked at him. "Good." He shrugged. "We need to know what's happening with the company." I didn't respond. But I knew exactly what he was thinking. Daniel believed Dad had chosen him. And honestly, I wasn't sure he was wrong. Monday morning arrived. The lawyer's office was located in a tall glass building downtown. His name was Michael Harrison. He had represented my father for almost 25 years. When we entered his office, I noticed 3 thick folders sitting on the table. One was labeled Robert Carter, Last Will and Testament. The second, Business Assets. And the third had no label at all. Daniel noticed it too. He pointed toward it. "What's that?" Mr. Harrison calmly replied. "We'll get to that." Daniel smiled. "I assume that's related to the estate?" The lawyer didn't answer. Instead, he asked everyone to sit. Mom sat beside me. Daniel sat across from us. Then Mr. Harrison opened the will. Robert Carter's final wishes were legally witnessed and signed 8 months before his death. Daniel leaned forward. The lawyer began reading. "To my wife, Margaret Carter, I leave the family residence and all personal belongings contained within it." Mom covered her mouth. She began crying. Then came the business. "To my son, Daniel Carter, I leave controlling ownership of Carter Construction Holdings, including all associated commercial properties and investment interests." Daniel's eyes widened. He looked at me. Then at Mom. He whispered, "I knew it." The lawyer continued. "Estimated current value, approximately $12.6 million. Daniel leaned back. For the first time that morning, he smiled. A huge smile. He whispered, "Wow." I felt something strange in my chest. Not jealousy. Not anger. Just sadness. Because Dad had given Daniel exactly what everyone expected. The business. The properties. The money. Then the lawyer continued. "To my daughter, Emily Carter." He paused. I looked up. "I leave my personal library, the small lakeside cabin, and all personal correspondence written by me during my lifetime." Daniel looked at me. I could almost hear what he was thinking. He got 12 million. I got books. He smiled again. I didn't say anything. The lawyer closed the first section. Daniel leaned back in his chair. "So that's it?" Mr. Harrison looked at him. "No." Daniel frowned. The lawyer reached for the second folder. And that's when everything changed. He opened it slowly. Inside were several bank statements, property records, investment documents, and one handwritten note from my father. Mr. Harrison looked directly at Daniel. "Your father instructed me to reveal this only after the primary estate had been acknowledged." Daniel's smile disappeared. "What exactly are you talking about?" The lawyer placed one document on the table. At the top was the name of a bank. Underneath it was an account number. And beside it was a balance. Daniel stared at the number. His face went completely pale. I leaned forward. I couldn't believe what I was seeing either. Because the balance wasn't 12 million. It wasn't 20 million. It was much more. $31,842,719.64. Mom gasped. Daniel stood up. "What is that?" Mr. Harrison calmly answered. "An account your father maintained privately for more than 20 years. Daniel stared at him. 31 million? The lawyer nodded. Yes. Daniel's breathing became heavier. Then he asked the question that would change our family forever. Who inherited it? The lawyer looked at him. Then slowly turned toward me. And said, your sister. My heart stopped. Daniel's face went blank. And I realized. Dad hadn't left me books. He had left me a secret. For several seconds, nobody moved. The office was completely silent. I stared at the bank statement lying on the table. $31,842,719.64. $31 million. And according to the lawyer, it belonged to me. Daniel slowly lowered himself back into his chair. His face had lost all color. Emily, he whispered, this has to be some kind of mistake. I couldn't answer. I looked at Mr. Harrison. Are you sure? He nodded. Your father was very specific. Daniel suddenly stood again. No. This isn't possible. Mr. Harrison remained calm. Daniel, please sit down. My father wouldn't do this. His voice echoed through the office. Mom started crying. Daniel. He ignored her. You just read the will. You said I inherited the company. You did. And now you're telling me she gets $31 million? That's correct. Daniel looked at me. His eyes were no longer angry. They were confused. Almost betrayed. Why? I swallowed. I don't know. But deep down, I knew there had to be a reason. Dad had never been careless with money. If he had created an account like this, he had done it intentionally. Mr. Harrison opened another document. There's more. Daniel laughed bitterly. Of course there is. The lawyer looked at me. Your father established this account 22 years ago. I frowned. 22 years? Yes. Why? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into the folder and pulled out another envelope. It was old. The paper had turned slightly yellow. And written across the front in my father's handwriting were 4 words. For Emily, when ready. My hands began shaking. I reached for it. Daniel immediately said, don't open that. I looked at him. Why? Because this is ridiculous. Mr. Harrison interrupted. Your father specifically instructed Emily to open it during the reading of the estate. I carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. I recognized Dad's handwriting immediately. My eyes filled with tears before. I even began reading. Emily. If you're reading this, then I'm no longer here to explain myself. I had to stop. I couldn't breathe. Mom reached over and touched my shoulder. I continued. You may be wondering why I left you an account worth more money than you ever imagined. The answer is simple. Because I watched you build your life without asking anyone to carry you. My eyes blurred. I wiped away a tear. Daniel stared at the letter. I continued reading. For years, I watched you work while your brother chased shortcuts. I helped Daniel because I believed one day he would learn to stand on his own. But helping someone and enabling them are not the same thing. Daniel suddenly looked away. The room became silent. Then I read the next paragraph. Emily, you never knew this, but every time you told me you didn't need my help, I understood what you were really saying. You wanted to know that you could survive without it. I started crying. Because that was exactly how I had felt. I didn't want Dad's money. I wanted his respect. Then I reached the final paragraph. And my heart stopped. There is one condition attached to the account. I looked up. What condition? Mr. Harrison answered quietly. Keep reading. I looked back at the letter. The money cannot be transferred to anyone else for 5 years. Daniel frowned. 5 years? I continued. During those 5 years, Emily must remain the sole beneficiary. She cannot give the money away because of family pressure. She cannot use it to rescue anyone who refuses to rescue themselves. My eyes moved down the page. And then I saw the final sentence. Especially Daniel. Daniel stood up. What? I froze. He walked toward me. Let me see that. I pulled the letter closer to myself. No. Emily, let me see it. Mr. Harrison stood. Daniel, stop. Daniel stared at him. Why would Dad write that? The lawyer's voice remained calm. Because he knew this moment might happen. Daniel shook his head. You all think I'm some kind of failure. Nobody answered. That silence was answer enough. Daniel walked toward the window. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he asked quietly. How long did Dad know? Mr. Harrison looked down at the documents. About what? About the account. 22 years. Daniel turned around. 22 years? Yes. And he never told me? No. Daniel laughed. But there was no humor in it. So he trusted her. He pointed at me. And not me. I finally spoke. Daniel, this isn't about trust. He looked at me. Then what is it about? Responsibility. His expression hardened. You think you're responsible? I know I am. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he walked out. The door slammed behind him. Mom remained seated. She looked exhausted. Emily. I looked at her. Did you know about this? She immediately shook her head. No. Did Dad ever talk to you about the money? She hesitated. Not this money. I frowned. What does that mean? Mom looked down. There were times your father and I argued about Daniel. My stomach tightened. What kind of arguments? She sighed. Your father wanted Daniel to become independent. I stared at her. And you? I always thought Daniel needed more time. I nodded slowly. More time became 20 years. Mom started crying. I know. That evening, I went home with the documents in a locked folder. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Dad. About the account. About the letter. And most of all, about Daniel. At 1:17 a.m., my phone rang. It was Daniel. I almost didn't answer. But I did. Hello? There was silence. Then his voice. Emily. Yes? I need to ask you something. What? Did Dad leave you anything else? I frowned. What do you mean? The account. That's all I know about. Another silence. Then he said something that made my heart race. That's not what I mean. What are you talking about? I found something in Dad's office. I sat up in bed. What? A key. To what? I don't know. He took a breath. But there's a number engraved on it. What number? He said it slowly. 4721. My stomach dropped. Because I had seen that number before. It was written on the back of Dad's old photograph. A photograph I had found years ago. And beneath the number were 2 words. Second account. I suddenly understood. The $31 million might not have been Dad's biggest secret. It might have been only the beginning. Then Daniel said, Emily. I think Dad left us another message. What does it say? His voice dropped to a whisper. Don't trust the first account. The call went silent. And before I could ask what he meant, the line disconnected. I stared at my phone. For the first time since Dad died, I realized something terrifying. Maybe the inheritance wasn't the secret. Maybe the secret was why Dad had hidden it. I stared at my phone for almost a full minute after the call ended. Don't trust the first account. Those words kept repeating in my head. I got out of bed, walked into the living room, and turned on every light. Suddenly, my house didn't feel safe anymore. Dad's photograph was sitting on the bookshelf. The same photograph I'd kept for years. He was standing beside an old wooden desk, smiling at the camera. I picked it up. On the back, written in faded blue ink, were the same 4 numbers Daniel had just mentioned. 4,721. And underneath them, second account. I had always assumed it was some old password. Now I wasn't so sure. I called Daniel back. He didn't answer. I tried again. Nothing, then I heard something outside. A car door slammed. I froze. I walked toward the window and looked through the curtains. A dark SUV was parked across the street. Its headlights were off. Someone was sitting inside. I couldn't see the driver's face. I stepped away from the window. For the first time, I wondered whether someone else knew about Dad's hidden accounts. And if they did, how much did they know? The next morning, I called Mr. Harrison. He answered immediately. Emily? I need to ask you something. Of course. Did my father ever mention an account number 4721? There was a long silence. Too long. My heart started beating faster. Mr. Harrison? Finally, he said. Where did you hear that number? Daniel found it in Dad's office. Another silence. Then his voice became serious. Emily, you need to come to my office. Why? Not over the phone. I grabbed my coat. When I arrived, Mr. Harrison was waiting for me. The moment I entered his office, I knew something was wrong. He locked the door. Then he closed the blinds. What's happening? I asked. He walked to his desk and pulled out a small metal box. I've had this for 22 years. He placed it in front of me. My name was written on the top. Emily. I stared at it. What is that? Your father gave it to me. When? 22 years ago. I looked at him. Why? He sat down. Because your father knew something might happen to him. My hands went cold. What did he know? Mr. Harrison sighed. That his business wasn't as clean as everyone believed. I stared at him. What are you saying? He opened the box. Inside were several old documents. Bank records. Property deeds. Copies of contracts. And one photograph. A photograph of my father standing beside another man. I recognized the other man immediately. It was Richard Blake, Dad's former business partner. I had heard his name growing up. But I thought he had disappeared from our lives years ago. Who is he? I asked. Mr. Harrison looked at me. Someone your father never trusted. I picked up the first document. It was a bank statement. But it wasn't for the $31 million account. This account belonged to a company I had never heard of. Carter Family Trust. The balance was almost zero. Why is this important? Mr. Harrison pointed to a transaction. A payment. Then another. Then another. All of them were going to different companies. Your father used this account to move money. Move money where? That's what we don't know. I looked at him. You said Dad's business wasn't clean. I said your father suspected someone was stealing from him. My heart sank. Who? Mr. Harrison didn't answer. Instead, he pulled out another document. It was a handwritten note from Dad. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Michael. If you're reading this, then I was right. Someone inside the company has been moving money without authorization. I don't know how far it goes. But I know one thing. Daniel cannot be allowed to inherit everything until the truth is discovered. I stopped reading. I looked up. Daniel? Mr. Harrison nodded. Your father specifically mentioned him. Why? Because Daniel had access to certain company accounts. My stomach tightened. Are you saying my brother stole from Dad? No. The lawyer's voice was firm. I'm saying your father wasn't sure. I left the office feeling sick. I didn't want to believe Daniel could do something like that. He was irresponsible. He was selfish. But stealing from Dad? That was different. I drove directly to Daniel's apartment. He wasn't there. I called him. No answer. Then I noticed his front door wasn't fully closed. I pushed it open. Daniel? No response. His apartment was a mess. Drawers were open. Papers were scattered everywhere. Someone had been searching the place. I immediately called his name again. Then I heard a noise from the bedroom. I walked toward it. Daniel? He suddenly appeared in the doorway. His face was pale. Emily? What happened? He looked behind me. Did anyone follow you? What? Answer me. No. He closed the door. Then locked it. Something's wrong. I stared at him. You called me last night. I know. You said Dad left another message. Daniel nodded. Then someone broke into my apartment. My heart dropped. Did they take anything? He shook his head. No. Then what did they want? Daniel looked at me. They were looking for the key. What key? The one with 4721. I froze. You still have it? He reached into his pocket. No. What? I hid it. Where? He looked around. Somewhere nobody would think to look. Then he pulled out his phone. There's something you need to see. He opened a photograph. It showed an old steel door. On the door was a small brass plate. 4721. I stared at the image. Where is this? Under Dad's old office. I frowned. Under the office? Daniel nodded. There was a basement. I had never heard of one. He continued. Dad told me never to go down there. Why? Daniel looked at me. Because he said there was something down there that could destroy our family. We drove to Dad's old office together. The building had been empty since his death. Daniel still had a key. We entered through the back. The hallway was dark. Dust covered the floor. Dad's office looked exactly as I remembered it. His desk. His chair. His old books. Everything was still there. Daniel walked toward a bookshelf. He pulled out a thick book. Nothing happened. He pulled another. Still nothing. Then he looked at me. Dad always said this bookcase was heavier than it needed to be. Together, we pushed it. The entire bookshelf moved. Behind it was a narrow staircase. I stared into the darkness. You've got to be kidding me. Daniel turned on his phone flashlight. Come on. We walked down. The air became colder. At the bottom was a steel door. And above the handle were the numbers. 4721. Daniel pulled the key from his pocket. He inserted it. The lock clicked. He opened the door. Inside was a small room. There were filing cabinets along every wall. A desk. A safe. And dozens of boxes. But what caught my attention was the large envelope sitting in the center of the desk. It had only one word written on it. Emily. I slowly walked toward it. Daniel whispered. Open it. I picked it up. It was heavier than I expected. Inside was a stack of documents. The first page was a bank statement. The second was a property record. The third was a list of names. And the fourth was a photograph. I looked at it. My hands began trembling. It was a photograph of Dad. But he wasn't alone. Standing beside him was a young woman. A woman I had never seen before. Daniel looked over my shoulder. Who is she? I turned the photograph around. There was writing on the back. My father's handwriting. I read the sentence aloud. Her name is Sarah. She is the reason I created the account. Daniel stared at me. Sarah who? I looked back at the photograph. Then I noticed something else. At the bottom of the image was a date. March 14, 2004. The exact year my father had opened the $31 million account. I looked at Daniel. Something happened that year. Before he could answer, we heard a sound upstairs. A door slammed. Someone was inside the building. Daniel immediately turned off the flashlight. We stood completely still in the darkness. Footsteps began moving across the floor above us. Slowly. Closer. Then we heard a man's voice. Robert should have destroyed these documents. Daniel grabbed my arm. The footsteps stopped. And then the man said, if his children found the second account, we have a serious problem. I looked at Daniel. He looked at me. Someone knew about the account. And they were already inside Dad's office. Daniel's hand tightened around my arm. Neither of us moved. The footsteps above us stopped. For several seconds, there was nothing but silence. Then we heard the office door open. A man's voice came from upstairs. Check the basement. Daniel looked at me. We had seconds. He pointed toward the back of the room. There was another door. We rushed toward it. Daniel opened it slowly. Behind it was a narrow storage corridor. We slipped inside and pulled the door shut. The footsteps began coming down the stairs. One step. Then another. Then another. I held my breath. The man reached the bottom. She leave anything? The neighbor looked toward Sarah's apartment. Maybe. She disappeared inside. A minute later, she returned holding a small envelope. She left this with me. My name was written across it. Emily Carter. I couldn't move. How did she know I was coming? The neighbor shook her head. I don't know. I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. There were only 2 sentences. Emily. Your father didn't leave you the money because he trusted you. He left it to you because I asked him to. I looked at Daniel. What does that mean? There was a second page. I unfolded it. And read. If you want to know the truth about the $31 million, find the man who signed the original transfer. At the bottom was a name. Richard Blake. Daniel stared at the page. Then his phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. Hello? Nobody spoke. Then a man's voice came through. Calm. Cold. You two should stop digging. Daniel's face changed. Who is this? The caller laughed quietly. You already know. The line went dead. I looked at Daniel. He slowly lowered the phone. That was him. Richard? He nodded. Then another message appeared on his phone. A photograph. It showed our mother's house. Taken only minutes earlier. And beneath it were 5 words. You should have left this alone. My heart pounded. Because suddenly, this wasn't just about Dad's money anymore. Someone was watching our family. And they were willing to do whatever it took to keep the truth buried.